On the night of August 12, 1952, 24 leading Jewish poets, writers, and intellectual public figures were executed in the basement of Moscow's notorious Lubianka prison. These were not random executions, but the culmination of a calculated campaign to eradicate Jewish life in the Soviet Union. The paradox of the August 12th massacre is clear. Poetry is, by its very nature, immortal. Once a poet has committed his words to paper or whispered them to another, he has secured a place for his ideas, his beliefs, and his convictions. A bullet cannot kill a poem any more than it can murder a philosophy. In his despair for the murdered poets, Hein Grade, their wartime comrade, wrote, "The young have forgotten you and me, an hour of our grief. Your darkly murdered tongue, silenced by a hangman's noose, is no longer heard." That poetic prophecy, written after the execution of the 24 writers, must not be allowed to be fulfilled. The repercussions of August 12th and the entire 1948 to 1953 period, when the Soviet government effectively demolished the remnants of the Jewish community, provoked Soviet Jews to fight to retain their Jewish identity. In the void created by the destruction of Jewish life, the Soviet government did not take into account the determined and obdurate nature of the Jewish people. When the war was over, 2 million Soviet Jews had perished. The Nazis had found in the Soviet Jews the synthesis of all they despised and feared. The Jewish Bolshevik became a prime target of the full force of Nazi propaganda and war machinery. The 3 million surviving Jews were physically and psychologically depleted. With their relatives dead and their towns destroyed, Jews returned home to encounter more anti-Semitism. This resurgence of popular anti-Semitism left Russian Jews with little more than their inherent will to survive. It was in this atmosphere that Soviet Jews began to rebuild their lives. But they had hardly any time before the Cold War, with its attendant suspicions and tensions, evolved. The Cold War engendered in the Soviet Union a fear of anything Western and a concomitant attempt to prove that things Soviet and Russian were best. The Soviet campaign against rootless cosmopolitanism was a natural outgrowth of this new perspective. At first, the campaign was directed at all those whose outlook and preferences were for Western and international ideas. However, as the propaganda became more extensive, anti-Jewish sentiments emerged.
The Anti-Fascist Committee was established in the USSR in the midst of the World War II in 1942. Stalin's goal for the committee was international fundraising for the Soviet army. Delegates visited Western countries, and in the USA, they managed to raise $16 million and at least $15 million in the UK and Canada. To achieve these goals, the committee recruited prominent writers, actors, and scientists with a worldwide reputation, including a prominent writer Ilya Ehrenburg, famous poet Samuel Marshak, a world celebrity director Sergei Eisenstein, and other famous cultural figures. In 1946, Stalin publicly condemned the Soviet intelligentsia for worshiping the West. It was a whistleblower starting an anti-Jewish campaign. The Soviet propaganda machine started to use the expression ruthless cosmopolitan, an euphemism for a Jew. Theaters and publishing houses banned works by foreign authors. In 1947, Stalin ordered the dissolution of the Jewish Anti-fascist Committee, and a wave of repressions swept across the country. The first victim associated with the Jewish Anti-fascist Committee was an actor and director, Solomon Michoels, who was brutally murdered on Stalin's direct order in Minsk in January 1948. By the beginning of 1949, 110 writers, poets, and scientists were arrested. Before his arrest, Peretz Markish wrote, "Hitler wanted to destroy us physically. Stalin wants to do it spiritually." The investigation of the criminal activities of members of the Jewish Anti-fascist Committee lasted for almost 3 years, and the criminal case consisted of 42 volumes.
Considering the positions of those involved, the charges brought against them are ironic and tragic. All 25 were charged with being enemies of the USSR, agents of American imperialism, bourgeois nationalist Zionists, and rebels who sought by armed rebellion to separate the Crimea from the Soviet Union and to establish their own Jewish bourgeois nationalist Zionist republic there. The trial ended on July 18, 1952. The defendants refused to plead guilty. According to some accounts, Markish and the aged Lazovsky showed particular valor in forcefully defending themselves, claiming that the prosecutors were the real criminals. All 24 male defendants were sentenced to death. Lina Stern was sentenced to life imprisonment. She was subsequently released and died in 1968 at the age of 90, without ever revealing the circumstances of the 1952 trial. On August 12, 1952, the 24 defendants were executed in the basement of Moscow's Lubianka prison on Dzerzhinsky Square. Reportedly, the last words of David Bergilson, who was 68 at the time of his murder, were, "Earth, O earth, do not cover my blood." Itzik Feffer, 1900 to 1952. Feffer, the youngest of those murdered on the night of August 12th, published his first poems in 1919. That same year, he joined the Communist Party and the Red Army. His murder is particularly ironic because he, more than the others, was a devoted follower of Stalin and proclaimed loyalty to the Communist Party. Despite his belief that communism made Jewish separatism unnecessary, during the war, Pfeffer was secretary of the Jewish Anti-fascist Committee. In 1943, he traveled abroad with Michoels to enlist support of Jews in the West. In contrast to his ode to Stalin, Pfeffer also wrote the poetic credo, "I am a Jew. I am a Jew. The wine of countless generations has strengthened me in my wandering. The angry sword of pain and sorrow could not destroy my existence, my people, my faith, and my flowering. It has not chained my freedom. From under the sword I shouted, I am a Jew. Neither Pharaoh's plagues, nor Titus, nor Haman could break my proud spirit. Eternity carries my name in her hands. My zest has not decreased on the black gallows of Madrid. My glory resounds through time and eternity. I am a Jew. When the Egyptian built my body into the walls, it hurt. And I sowed the raw earth with my pain, and a sun arose. Under the sun, a path stretched out, scattered with barbs. They would prick me in the eyes. I am a Jew. The 40 years of a former life which I suffered in the desert sand have given me the courage of my years. Bar Koch Pascal has cast its spell on each kernel of my suffering. And more than gold have I preserved the stubbornness of my grandfather. I am a Jew. What do I need gold for? I gathered that when I did not even have a corner. Could gold satiate my high spirits or my gloom? Samson's hair, which Delilah stole, glowed and satisfied more than cold golden coins. I am a Jew. The wrinkles in the brow of wise Rabbi Akiva, the wisdom of Isaiah's prophecy have quenched my thirst, my dear, and have matched it with hatred. The zeal of the Maccabean heroes still seethes in my rebel blood. From all pyres I have announced, I am a Jew. The marvelous judgment of R. Solomon has not abandoned me in my wandering. And Heinrich Heine's crooked smile also has cost me much spilled blood. Through the centuries, I have heard Yehuda Halevi's call, and I have not tired of it. I have withered often, but have not perished. I am a Jew. The noise of Amsterdam's marketplace did not disquiet my Spinoza. Space itself makes things bigger. Marx's sun upon the earth, refreshed with new redness, the ancient blood in my spirit, and my unextinguished fire. I am a Jew. There is in my eyes the glow, the serenity, and the stress of Levitan's sunsets, of the blessed path which Mendele took, the blade of Russian bayonets, the dazzle of the rye at harvest. I am a son of the Soviets. I am a Jew. The echo of Haifa port resounds with the ring of my voice. Unnoticed telegraph wires carry me over sea and dale, the heartbeat of Buenos Aires, and from New York, a Yiddish song, the horror of Berlin's edicts. I am a Jew. I am a Jew who has drunk from Stalin's magic cup of joy. Whoever wants to let Moscow sink, to turn the world backward, to him I say no. To him I shout down. I go with the Eastern peoples. The Russians are my brothers. I am a Jew. My glory, a ship on both streams. My blood lights up eternity. My pride is Yakov Sverdlov's name and Kaganovich, Stalin's friend. My youth floats over the snows. My heart is full of dynamite. My luck quivers in the trenches. I am a Jew. I am not alone. My heroism grows. The struggle today is for an honest piece of bread. I glorify the flame. I raise the storm which brings death to the enemy in brown. My strength no longer lags behind. The blood of Papernik and Garelek cries and seethes from the earth. I am a Jew. And to spite the enemies who already prepare graves for me. I shall still have pleasure without end beneath the red banner. I shall plant my vineyards and be the forger of my destiny. I shall still dance on Hitler's grave. I am a Jew.
So a little about Hofstein. He was born near Kiev. He was a leader in Jewish cultural affairs during the revolutionary years and protested the suppression of the Hebrew language by the government. In 1922, he published Elegies Mourning for the Ukrainian Jewish communities devastated by Petliura, Denikin, and other hordes. And this lovely book was illustrated by Mark Chagall. In 1923, Hofstein left Russia for Berlin and then Palestine. He returned to Russia in the late 20s and hailed Palestine, saying, "I am proud of belonging to a nation that grows not weary, that builds and believes. In order to achieve immortality, one does not necessarily have first to die. More than all the world, my people remember, whether in Kassel or in Hovel, where it may be, and I am proud to belong to such a people." This is a less political poem than the one that Yanina read. One of his more famous poems, In Winter's Twilight, in my own English translation, and then I'm going to read it in Yiddish. This is In Winter's Twilight. So I've tried to capture his eloquence, musicality, and melancholy, though of course I can't compete with the original. So beautiful. But anyway, In Winter's Twilight. In Russian fields, in winter twilight, where can one be lonelier? Where can one be lonelier? The old horse, the squeaky sleigh, the path under snow, and I'm in the middle of it. In a corner of the pale horizon, the light is smoldering, dying. Ahead, a desert of snow. There is a drowsy village, sunk deep in snow. A Jewish house like the others, but with bigger windows. And in that house, to which many paths lead, I am the oldest of the children. And my world is narrow, my circle is small. In 2 weeks I've gone once into town. To long and silence for wide open fields, for big paths and little trails swallowed by snow. To bear in the heart the hidden cry of seeds that wait and wait to be sown. In Russian fields, in winter twilight, where can one be lonelier? Where can one be lonelier? And now in the original Yiddish, in Winter Vernachten. In Winter Vernachten auf russische Felder, wo kann man sein Ernte? Wo kann man sein Ernte? A Pferdel und alltings, a skrippender Schlitten, a Schliach a Verschneiter, und ich bin inmitten. Von unten in einzigen Winkel entlassen, noch löschen sich teure, fliehende Passen. Von vorten verspricht sich am Niedber a weiter, und weit vorn sie geht, is a zähnliche Heise. Dort drömmelt der Hutor, versunken in Schnee. Zum jüdische Heisel viel stärklich gehen, a Heisel wie alle, nur größer die Fenster. Und zwischen die Kinder, dort bin ich die Älteste. Und eng ist mein Weltel, und klein ist mein Rädel. Und 2 Wochen einmal von Hutor in Städtel. In Bänken, in Schweigen, von Felder, von Breite, von Wegen und Weglich, verschneite, verweite, und Fragen in Herzen, verborgene Wehen, von Säumen, wo's warten und warten, auf Sehen. In Wintervernacht auf russische Felder, wo kann man sein Ernte? Wo kann man sein Ernte? A großer Dank. Thank you.
Sabbath is Gone by David Hofstein. Sabbath is gone. On the far-off snow, a big someone pours gray ash. In the little store, already waiting, a sallow girl with a black flask. The whip is rested beside the oven, idle leaning into the dark. On the ledge, a half-seen napkin softly hiding the Sabbath bread. The meal is eaten. In the dimness, my father melts into the board. Between my sisters, in tired shadow, a thread of voices whispers, weaves. My mother, by the window, searches for a distant star, does not find it, sits in thought. I shrink into sadness, trying not to think that the cow is waiting for me, hay, and night. Parade by David Hofstein. We move with you in your advancing ranks, marching mankind, the proud and the courageous, the seething and the chill, step by step, held high on poles of shame, swaying there, the old God, its tatters patched with air, there flutters still and flutters, the old red banner, no step back, and sleepless drumsticks pour their pellets on stiff hides, and cymbals clash, their sharpness hones the pliant air, and flinging high its cry, the gleaming trumpet. Today I too am a piece of clanging brass. I leap across marching mankind, the proud and the courageous, the seething and the chill, step by step. Held high on poles of shame, swaying there, the old God. Its tatters patched with air, there flutters still and flutters, the old red banner, no step back. And sleepless drumsticks pour their pellets on stiff hides, and cymbals clash, their sharpness hones the pliant air, and flinging high its cry, the gleaming trumpet, today I too am a piece of clanging brass. I leap across quiet velvet places. I wake the weary. I cover the sigh of the exhausted with raucous laughter, no step back.
Leib Kvitko, 1893 to 1952. Kvitko was orphaned at an early age and lived with his grandmother in the Ukraine. He began to write poetry at the age of 12 and had his first works published while still in his early 20s. He established his reputation as a writer of children's stories and poetry. He was a member of the Communist Party and adopted the philosophy of the new regime wholeheartedly. His enchantment wavered when, during and after World War II, he encountered manifestations of anti-Semitism. Kvitko studied the folklore of many other nations, and his work was translated into many languages. The well-known Russian writer Kornei Chukovsky wrote of him that Kvitko was a victim to dark suspiciousness, libels, and violence, and perished at the time of the Stalinist lawlessness. Days grow darker. Day grows darker and darker. Gangs come nearer to the town, gangs muddled with blood from killing children, hardened, coming closer, zealously greedy, cutting heads, exhausted, terrified heads, and my head too, my head that's yet so young, and too my heart that lullabied deep inside the joy of love. A survivor tragic will enumerate the slain. My dead name will he write, along with many others in letters small on a lengthy list. Oh, may he not forget at least to note on that long list how old I was. Let him leastwise note that my heart was bloody young, that strong like fear was my will to live, strong and crazed like my final day. Women. With dancing fingers, their socks a-knitting, and whispering each bent to the other near, and their eyes mournful shadows standing clear. You, passerby, and you, my brother, this do I know. Something then is sure to blow. Something then is sure to blow. In women's heart is prophet's spirit yet extant. As into Ugim Tumim do they gaze within intent. They sense a secret and solve its riddle. Whispering, each is bent to the other near. You pass them by and look about, seeking but a fringe of what they know. You search in fear and nearly driven mad, barely flee away with pounding heart. I urge you, brother, not then into the street to go. Something then is sure to blow. Something then is sure to blow.
Two poems by Leib Kvitko, and these two poems represent the period when he wholly embraced the Soviet state. The first one shows the Jew who was formerly accused of being a middleman living off of other people's labor and embracing the ideal of the farmer. I am tied, Leib Kvitko. I am tied to a great today. Its big tree, my friend, has perfumed me from its roots. I am tied to a great today. The plow is sharp, my friend, the soft earth moist. Whether there's sun or not, the cow's smell strengthens me in the courtyard. With my feet solid and my strong hand, I could wrench the head of a young ox. And the next one was from the earlier times of the revolution, and it's a child's poem. Kvitko wrote quite a few of, actually, books of poems for children. To Odessa. Mama, let me, Mama, go to Odessa. I want to hear how the Marseillaise is sung. See how the workers stand on the barricades, how hopes beat back this dark century. A child there, Mama, no one will step on me. A child can also help to drag the planks. And Mama, don't you know, the whole world is made of workers. It's all poor people, brothers to us. We are storming as one. Mama, let me, Mama, go to Odessa. Revolution stands on tall barrels, big and small. Get up, come on, let's go. And then I have a poem written in, on the other side of 1947 by Peretz Markish, where all of the typical kinds of tropes, like particularly the dawn, the Soviet Union was the dawn of the new day, is completely, that trope is seen very, very differently in this one. So I'm going to read it first in English, the translation that I did yesterday, and it was helped a little bit by Yael Haver, one of my teachers. So first in English, and then I'll read it in the original Yiddish. The bat. It's no longer night, not yet day. The end mingles with the beginning. The bat navigates her way in the imperceptible in between. She soars through just so, like a small gliding shadow of what is maybe only there and maybe elsewhere, scattered. She hurries home, it's already time, yet she's tempted by a glow, a sparkle from the white dawn, somewhere thawing on a window. And in her simple shawl lifted over her head, she flaps, she flies, she falls towards the dawning charm. Just then there was a light, but already nothing can be seen. For a moment she loses the end of night, the day, its dawn. One swoop straight, one swoop curved, the glow dies. It's no longer here. The bat turns herself around through the imperceptible in between. And here is the original. Die Fledermäus. Sie schon nicht Nacht, sie's noch nicht Tag. Der Sof und Anheb sich vermischen. A Fledermäus gibt sich a Trog. In der nicht unsäglichen Zwischen. Sie gibt sich a Saglitsch a durch. Wie a Stück fliehendicken Schotten, von den, was öfter bläus sich durch und öfter umetun zu schotten. Sie eilt aheim, ihr ist schon Zeit, nur es geht on, obschein a verschlob sie, von der begehendicken Weiß, was schmelzt sich ergens auf ein Fenster und in ihr wochendicken Schal über den Kopf aufgehoben, gibt sie ein Flieh, gibt sie ein Fall auf dem begehendicken Säuben. Otto nur was gewinn ist Licht, nur etwas sieht man es schon da nicht und auf eine Weile sie verliert, dem Sof von Nacht, vom Tag, dem Anheb. A heute gleich, a heute krumm, der Abschein starbt, ist nicht hier schon, und skehrt die Fledermäuse sich herum, durch den nicht unsäglichen Zwischen.
I'm also going to read about Peretz Markish and read a little short biography about him before I read the first poem. Peretz Markish was born in 1895 and lived until 1952. And his long career began in 1917 when his first Yiddish poem, The Fighter, was published. In the wake of the revolution and civil war, he went to Warsaw, but returned to the Soviet Union in 1926. He became what most have called the leading personality in Soviet Yiddish literature, and was the only Yiddish writer to be awarded the Order of Lenin. After the Second World War, Markish wrote War, an epic poem, which emphasized the suffering and heroism of Jewish fighters. Markish was arrested in 1949, and by the time of his death, he was reported to have been insane from his 3 years of imprisonment and torture. 5 years after his murder, in a foreword to an anthology of his poetry, the Soviet writer Boris Lavrenner wrote, "He fell a victim of enemies' false libels. The enemies of the fatherland have physically destroyed this great poet, but they have not been able to still his echoing poetry." So I will read the poem, which was translated from Yiddish to English by Armand Schwerner. I don't know whether I'm at home or homeless. I'm running, my shirt unbuttons. No bounds, nobody holds me. No beginning, no end. My body is foam, smelling of wind. Now is my name. I spread my arms, my hands, pierce the extremes of what is. I'm letting my eyes roam around and do their drinking from the foundations of the world. Eyes wild, shirt ballooning, my hands separated by the world. I don't know if I have a home or have a homelessness or am a beginning or an end.
Peretz Markish, translated from Yiddish by Armand Schwerner. The winds dry the bloated fences, my feet clot the black dirt. Tell me today, swollen earth, answer me this time, unkempt and carefree wind. I think I see you, the first time. I've got you in my 3-year-old eyes. The red cows, the valley of mud, the dirty asses and filled up teats. Pleasure hits me quietly, morning warm, the dried hay from last year, naked horses. I would embrace all those cows and stretch out with them on the earth and howl together. Peretz Markish is certainly one of the most, I guess, stunning figures of this constellation. A little bit of a Byron, as you will hear in the Ozerov poem I'm going to read now. Very brave. At Mikhailov's funeral, he read his poem where he explicitly called Mikhailov's death a murder. And the similarity with the Lermontov, another Byron of the Russian poetry, is striking. Lermontov famously wrote his poem after Pushkin's duel death, accusing the Tsar. But those were, as Akhmatova would put it, vegetarian times compared to these. I'm going to read a portrait, so-called portrait, written by Leib Kvitko, a Soviet writer of Jewish descent who survived the era we're talking about, though he was fired and he was targeted. Ozerov's, it's relevant to some extent, so I will say a few words about Ozerov himself. Lev Ozerov, or Lev Goldberg, he changed it. Ozerov was his pen name, and it was quite traditional for the Soviet writers of Jewish origin in the 30s to change their names to sound less Jewish. Ozerov means of the lake, which is a reference to the, of course, Lake School of British poets, suggested by another Jewish writer, Svetlov. Ozerov translated quite a few Yiddish poets, Kvitko and Hofstein and Galkin, all of those who were murdered on the night we're remembering today. He also was one of the first people who wrote about Babi Yar, and he wrote it as early, his poem as early as in 1944. It's very early, and it was published in 1946. His account of the slaughter of Jews in the Ukraine was supposed to open the section in Ehrenburg's and Grossman's famous The Black Book that was supposed to come out after the war about the atrocities of Nazis, but it was never published until 1993. One of the portraits, the free verse poems that Ozerov wrote in his late years, is about a few Yiddish poets. One of them is about Peretz Markish. It's titled Peretz Markish. It is included in this book of portraits that came out in New York Review of Books. And this particular poem is translated by Maria Hofstein. I will read two footnotes that Maria included because it's important. One of the characters that you hear about here is the General Borisovlebsky, who was during the Khrushchev thaw, was the head of the Commission of Rehabilitation of illegally repressed. And also a portrait is mentioned, the real painting is mentioned, portrait of Markish, that was painted in 1937 when Markish, of course, was awaiting an arrest, which didn't happen then, happened later. And it is important here in this context. Peretz Markish by Leib Kvitko. Once you'd seen him, you could say you'd seen Byron. Honor, dignity, stature, a melancholy beauty. He'd raise his head and with half-closed eyes recite his poems, as if he were singing. He wrote his own Childe Harold, his own Don Juan, his own Beppo, his sin, his one and only sin, that he wrote in Yiddish. He could express himself only in Yiddish. For this, he was jailed. For this alone, executed. Everyone knew, but it wasn't done to say it out loud, to spell it out in black and white. It was said and written, he died. He went and died. Just went and died, you see. Why get people upset? In the province we call Volhynia lies a village we call Cologne. That's his childhood. That's his grandfather, Shimson Ber. That's his gather. And after that, he was chorister, tutor, day laborer, worker at the vineyards, army private, and office clerk. But he didn't like calculating. He liked the immeasurable. On the flip side of banking documents, poems began to appear. This dreamer's distant gaze was focused not on the faces of clients, but on the galaxy. Later, he said in passing, while you clutch a grass blade, I hold up the earth, the planet, vast and blue. Immensity is what attracts me, but your grass blade is a part of it too. We didn't see each other for a long time. Then I saw him on a canvas by Alexandra Labus. There he is, Markish, who was built for a long time, for a long life, imagining his last hour. There is a touch of sunset in the dawn blaze. The light melts into a dark that allows no return. His widow is making inquiries about her husband, about his notebooks and manuscripts confiscated when he was arrested. His widow walks down the long corridors of the 7th floor, corridors her soul had walked long before. She had endured much, a waiting room, a small window where relatives could hand in parcels of food and clothes for a prison. But now she's here by invitation. Gorgeous and charming General Borisovlebsky addresses her. You can probably guess why I've called you here. No, tell me. I am now able to inform you that your husband has been rehabilitated. Where is he? The general's reply is ready and waiting, plain and polished. He was executed by enemies of the people. And he offers Markish's widow a glass of water, also ready and waiting. I want to read his case file. But you are not a lawyer. Where is my husband's grave? He has none. More time passed. Another telephone call. This is the KGB finance department. It seems we owe you a little money. What do you mean? You've already returned me the money I tried to send to my husband, but which he never received. Pause. An in breath. An out breath. We owe you for the teeth. What teeth? The gold crowns. In a voice not her own, the widow let out a wild scream. Neighbors ran out in the hallway and caught her as she collapsed in a faint. She was pale now and silent, while the telephone receiver, on its twisted cord, groped the wall, swinging like a pendulum, counting off our godforsaken time. 1990. Of course, this is in the communal apartment where there's only one telephone for several families. Zarina asked me to share a family story. It's really not a big, it's not even a story. I just, Peretz Markish was part of my childhood in two ways. In a way of a memory that my grandmother, Ophelia, shared repeatedly about the New Year celebration in a company of artists. She was an actress right before the war, and how Peretz Markish was in that company, and how handsome he was. He didn't even say handsome, he said красивый, which is more, in Russian, it's more like beautiful. And she would invariably say that, and herself a beauty. It was really quite strange for me as a kid to hear that over and over. And she would be very, very sad when she said that. It was explained to me how he died, though. And the blue volume from the so-called poets library collection series that I read, the portrait, the photo there, would invariably invoke that that short phrase that we celebrated the New Year together, and he was so sad.
I'll be reading Peretz Markish. This poem is called Poem, and it's translated from Yiddish to English by Armand Schwermer. The last color of dusk fades. A soft black wraps the head of the world. Night surrounds him from under the earth. Sky, distance, quietly under its loosened black shirt, hides him. Man and horse listen and keep quiet, but the wind moves around talking to the walls. The windmill motions to the sky. Thank you. The next poem I'll be reading from Peretz Markish, also translated by Armand Schwerner from Yiddish. I won't put on a light all night. The wall disappears in tears and quiet. From the blue dovecot of my prayed out face, ripped out of my eyes, the dove by itself and gone, a rope circles my head. My head is the shame under a rope. My hands, my cheated hands, loneliness. I will make up a bed for us on the threshold. Would you caress me? If you would caress me, caress me. Will the dove come back in the morning? She will. I'll kiss you, world, your fingers, and close my eyes and splash out your blue secret. Thank you, God. The wild dove ripped itself from my eyes. It flew. Somewhere, my walls walked quietly off. And where did you hide your hands? I won't put on a light all night in the blue dovecot of my mourned out face. Thank you.
I'm also reading two poems by Peretz Markish. They're both called poems. They're both translated by Etta Bloom. The first poem. I dress myself in darkness, over my head, over my feet, my hands. I walk about as in a great black prayer shawl, edges torn on all sides, and grapple with black walls. Dark creatures trail me endlessly, congealed with distances. Vast emptiness lies open before me, where I step on the feet of dark straying girls. I march about, crowned. Darkness grows out of me. Darkness stretches itself into my remoteness. The earth turns from me dark, and from everywhere black horses leap upon me. The second poem is a little different. It's more playful. Hey, what are you trading in? Sorrow? What are you selling? Despair? I'm a buyer and do business, and I barter and I wander where it happens as it goes. Day and night, at odd moments, on a scale of joy, I weigh it. First I buy and then I sell at fairs, markets, crossroads, with whom I chance to meet and whomever I greet. I pay cash. I'm a buyer and do business. And I barter and I wander. What do you buy? Corpses, rags, dead fathers? Hey, you. So I lost a customer. Die and be reborn.
I will talk about Solomon Lazovsky. He was born in 1878 in a small village near Yekaterinoslav. His real name was Drizo. His revolutionary activity starts in the early 1900s. From 1939 to 1949, he was the oldest member of CK, Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. And during World War II, he was chairman of Sovinform Bureau, assigned to handle all information from the Soviet battlefront to foreign press. He had many positions within the party. He had a very eventful life. During the war, he was also a member of the Jewish Anti-fascist Committee, organized as a part of Sovinform Bureau. The main goal of the Jewish Anti-fascist Committee was to influence international public opinion to get material support for the Soviet war effort, especially among Jews in Allied countries. Coleman Mihoils, the famous actor, and the others began talking about the creation of a Jewish homeland within the Soviet Union. And Lazovsky advised that the best location would be Crimea. And so he helped Mihoils draft a written appeal to Stalin in February 1944. After the creation of the State of Israel, Stalin interpreted these plans as a Jewish conspiracy. And basically that's when the campaign against the cosmopolitans, which was another euphemism for Jews, began. And Stalin ordered the police to organize a show trial with Lazovsky. Solomon Lazovsky is the main defendant. Lazovsky was arrested on January 26, 1949, tortured, but despite being quite old, over 70 years old, he never admitted his guilt or accused others. The closed trial lasted for 2.5 months, and it is said that the skill with which Lazovsky destroyed the prosecution caused the judge, Alexander Cheptsov, to interrupt the trial for a week, and then to appeal for the investigation to be reopened, which never happened before in any of the political trials under Stalin. Even after the judge had carried out his instruction to return a verdict of guilty, he refused to order the death sentences to be carried out immediately. So he forwarded an appeal for clemency to Stalin, and Stalin rejected. Lazovsky was executed on August 12, 1952, together with the other members of Jewish Anti-fascist Committee. He was the last old Bolshevik to be killed on Stalin's orders. He also was a very distant relative of my father. The connection was through my father's uncle, Davis. He had two first names, Davis and Dagobert. And Davis's or Dagobert's wife was Reyes, the sister of Lazovsky. The story that I will tell now is mostly about my father's uncle, but it comes to Lazovsky. Davis's wife, Raisa, was a Trotskyist. For her Trotskyisms, she was imprisoned by the Soviets for 1 month in the beginning of 1925, I believe. And Davis worked as a film art for Mosfilm, the Moscow Film Studio. In 1925, after his wife was released from prison, Davis was sent on a business trip to the film studio in Berlin, UFA, a famous German film studio which still exists. Despite having a Soviet passport, he decided not to go back to the Soviet Union because he didn't want his wife to be arrested, to be in danger of. So he stayed in Berlin and worked for UFA. He survived World War II in Berlin in hiding. He had apparently very good German friends who hid him in the eastern part of Berlin, while his wife Raisa was hidden in the western part of Berlin. When Berlin was liberated, Davis's wife Raisa was free to leave West Germany when the Americans came. After the Soviets took charge of the eastern section of Berlin, which they renamed East Berlin, Davis was arrested by the Soviets and accused of having survived the war while on paper still being a Soviet citizen. And a Soviet citizen was not supposed to have survived the war in Berlin. Whether or not he had spent that time in hiding, that didn't concern them. I'm sure he told them he was in hiding because he was a Jew, but I wrote to Memorial in the 90s asking to find what happened to Davis. I got some documents from the time when he was arrested, and this is protocol обыска, protocol of this house search, and basically he didn't have anything after he came out of hiding in Berlin, in East Berlin. He just had a passport, a pocket watch, and some German marks. Davis was put in prison in East Berlin, a Soviet prison or East German prison. He spent over a year there. From there, he was taken to a Soviet concentration camp in Belarus. The concentration camp was apparently near a small town called Chervin. In the first days in camp, he fell ill from cold and malnutrition. So he wrote a letter to his brother-in-law, Lazovsky. Lazovsky was very high up in the Soviet government. Davis wrote him a letter asking him for a blanket and some warm clothes. Lazovsky did not send those things, but he told Davis's niece about the letter, calling her, asking her to meet him somewhere in the street because he felt it was unsafe to speak about a relative in a camp on the phone. When they were both outside, he told her about Davis's letter. So neither of them sent anything. Lazovsky didn't send the things, and the niece didn't send the things to Davis in the camp. Maybe one can understand why Lazovsky didn't send the things because at that time he was already in the investigation, and his arrest was just 6 months away. Of course, he couldn't know about the arrest, but things were not exactly very good and peaceful with him. After Stalin's death in 1953, the niece, who was my father's cousin, also called my father on the phone and also asked him to come outside, and just like Lazovsky did with the niece, and just like Lazovsky did with her. So when they were both outside, she told my father about that letter from Davis, and my father wanted to send him a blanket and warm clothes, but he didn't know the address. He did something that most Soviet citizens would not do, but my father did not spend his life in the Soviet Union until just a couple of years before then, after the end of the war, because he spent his youth in bourgeois Latvia. So he didn't have the fears that most Soviet people have. He did something strange. He wrote to the KGB asking for the address and the name of the camp where to send the clothes to his uncle. He got a response from the KGB. They said that his uncle Davis already died. He died 5 years ago, soon after he sent that letter, and didn't get any reply. So this is how the life of my father's uncle Davis and the life of his brother-in-law came together without coming together. Basically, they both died. No one survived. I will read poems by Peretz Markish. This poem was translated from Yiddish by Etta Blum. On their horns, cows bear the bleating of herds. In our great land of woe, sorrow ripens on the trees. I'll hone no axe on them, nor fix myself a hedge. From the sky's bright fabric, my mother sews me a shirt. On deserted deep of my destiny, unseeing awaits a train. Everywhere, sorrow on your bosom, inexpressibly, great land of terror. So what if the throat lies stretched across the rails? On Sunday there'll be a carousel, despair will caper. Was translated from Yiddish by Irving Howe, very famous specialist in Yiddish. Got a bit of heart? Forget it. Want a little piece? Choke on a bone. Somewhere from the balalaika, bursting wildly on a stone. Got yourself a pain? Spit on it. Salt your eye and have a souse. Somewhere cats will drink a l'chaim in a corner with a mouse. I too am now a welcome guest. Tear the rags off till you hurt. For a kopeck by my head, strip your pants and rip your shirt. Catch a dog and pull him closer. Pitch your faith into his ear. Somewhere lunatics are dancing round a circle made of cheer. Got a bit of heart? Forget it. Want a little piece? Choke on a bone. Somewhere strum the balalaikas, bursting wildly on a stone.
My grandparents on my mother's side are from Belarusian shtetls, from outside Gomel and Bobruisk, respectively. And when my grandmother was a little girl, 4 or 5 years of age, at least that's what she told me when I was a teen, that back in 1908, when everyone around them was leaving for America, they also had sold out everything they had, and they were like lower middle class. With the resulting money, they purchased the birth tickets to the boat, Odessa, New York-bound boat. And on a given day, they loaded whatever remaining earthly possessions they had, their parents did, and a couple of their children, and they set out for the train station in Gomel. And due to impassable roads, due to heavy rains, uncommonly heavy rains over southern Belarus, that week, they got stuck in the mud, and they were late to the Minsk train from Gomel. And as a result, everything in their journey to Odessa, and that was several stages of changing trains, had shifted along the axis of time. And so by the time they got to the Odessa port, the boat had already left without them, approximately a couple hours earlier. At least, again, that's the perhaps apocryphal story that my grandmother often told me when I was a teen. And when I was a teen, and so they, tickets were non-refundable. And so they had no other recourse but to just turn around and go back to the place they had already left, the place they had absolutely nothing connecting them to anymore. But then as a result of that, and when I was a teen, of course, I was initially both excited and massively disappointed because, well, I could have been born in America. I would have spoken English without an accent. I would have, been able to afford jeans and do all kinds of things that Americans do and so forth. And I wouldn't be sitting on the outskirts of Leningrad. But then, of course, the realization set in that had my grandmother at the age of 4 or 5 moved to America with her parents, then basically someone else would be sitting there in the outskirts of Leningrad and everywhere else instead of me, obviously, because my grandfather at that time also was about the same age of 4 or 5, and his family was not moving anywhere. And he, at the age of 14, on the contrary, became a member of the party. And, as lots and lots of young revolutionary kids from the shtetl, the revolution that liberated Jews, supposedly, so he became an ardent revolutionary. And at some point in 1924, my grandparents met in Leningrad, where my grandmother moved to study biology at Leningrad University, and he was a young communist leader at that point, and they met at some kind of communal event or something connected with the Great Flood of 1924. He was coordinating the rescue effort, and she was there just as a voluntarily helping the elderly and just saving people and so forth. So, and then in due course they got married, and then my mother was born and so forth. All of that would have happened in America, but not with my grandfather, and not with, and the whole chain of events would have. And then when in late 1930s, in 1938, 39, grandfather was a original level young communist organizer, and his friends were being obviously arrested and executed. They lived in the semi-nomenclatura building in Midtown Leningrad, and so grandmothers had seen couple of his friends being led out of the building and pushed into this little Raven, kind of this Black Maria kind of little humpbacked car, and driven off. And each time grandfather was heard to find out that one of his old friends had turned out to be a Japanese spy, a British spy, and so forth. And he would tell her, like, how could I have been so blind, and it's unforgivable. The party, my myopia is unforgivable, and I should be punished by the party, and so forth, and so on. Whereas my grandmother, who hated Stalin, but kept her mouth shut, obviously, up until the very last moment when the news had been broken on the radio, and grandfather eventually walked into the living room covered in tears and say, how we're going to live now without him. And she, for the first time, she just let out a string of curse words to express her attitude towards Stalin, at which point it said, like, I lived with the enemy of the people all these years. At some point in 1939, apparently she took him from, and it probably took her a tremendous amount of effort to persuade him to actually ask for a vacation or time off or whatever it was, because the revolutionaries communists don't take time off from work, because Stalin doesn't, so why should anyone? But she managed to persuade him to come to her birthplace, to their birthplace, to Belarus, to Gomel, and sit it out there, because people were arrested right, left, and center all around them. And so that And so they came there, and already there, of course, the pacing of arrests and executions was slower because the place was much smaller, and he was not on the rosters of local NKVD there and so forth. So in that sense, he was probably in that way he was saved. Yeah. So yeah. So that's in a nutshell one of the two tiny little aspects of two tiny little, just basically Jewish histories in the Soviet Union. And then, of course, you know, there was a strong rumor shortly before Stalin's death, right? And just, you know, that the Jews would be put in cattle cars and sent off to 11 time zones away to the Jewish Autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic of Azerbaijan and so forth. It's not a certainty, but although grandfather, again, well, being an old Bolshevik and fairly close to, he actually expressed eagerness to go there, and he had heard that that would actually be the case. But then Stalin kicked the bucket. Instead of Azerbaijan, I managed to get born in Leningrad. So much in life is a matter of being somewhere at a certain time at that certain place. It's just a matter of pure luck that you have absolutely no hand in. So these brilliant people, the only crime they had committed essentially is that they were born maybe a couple decades too early, 3, 4, 5 decades too early. And if you're there and there is nothing you can do to change the trajectory of your life, and in the end, basically you get executed because there is a madman sitting in the Kremlin. So the two poems I'm going to read by Itzik Feffer, translated from Yiddish by John Hollander, a very prominent American poet. In all my short happy life, I've never been lost nor forgotten the way I came. I laugh to myself when I remember that I carry some famous rabbi's name. The name that my grandfather wanted for me was the Holy Reib Itzikil of Skviras, that I might lay tefillin and wear a talis and do my singing of prayers and zmiras, that I might be the richest man in town and my wife's housekeeping be the best. So days and nights gave way to each other, and each year came to follow the rest. The sun has blessedly bronzed my body. My life is all battles and songs of fame. It really breaks me up to remember that I carry some famous rabbi's name. And the second poem by Itzik Feffer is So What If I've Been Circumcised? It also translated from Yiddish by John Hollander. So what if I've been circumcised with rituals as among the Jews? Field winds have tanned my middle-sized, pale, dreaming feet to darker hues. Some Jews long for tzimis, yet we toughs for smoke and flame in motion. 8 years embattled meadows set underneath the sky's blue ocean. I'm a quiet guy and hardly a villain. My honesty has no great appeal. I'm never known to put on tefillin. I'm never known to wheel and deal. So what if I've been circumcised with rituals as among the Jews? Field winds have tanned my middle-sized, pale, dreaming feet to darker hues. Okay, thank you. Thank you, and thank you for organizing this very important event.
Shlomo Michoels, In Eternal Light at His Casket, translated from Yiddish by Herbert H. Haper. Your last appearance before your people among broken rocks bedecked with snow, but without your word, without your voice, nothing but your frozen breath. Yet we hear now too, as always, the unseen rustle of your eagle wings, in which our people clothed you to be its solace, echo, and its plea. The curtain does not descend. The lights are not extinguished. Your sleeping lion head shines forth, and from your figures hovering, your immortal tongue. Here we've come to say farewell to you, to you who could, like echoes of long ages' pain, carry songfully Sholem Aleichen's tear, that would like precious gem lean forth. A flooding onrush. Your last appearance is peopled dense. Your last sensation onto your casket, an honor god descends of spirits made living by your magic grace. Now and here, you used and need no wig. A royal cloak is even more unneeded. To see that you are indeed King Lear, who his crown for wisdom bartered. No makeup, no gesture. The colored jaws are weeping, orphaned, look at them. But clown falls with noisy crash. Those stars don't fall. Those stars wander without aim. They are awakened by the scornful music, and hither swarms up through curtains fold, with silent rustle, their glance cast down in pain. They will carry your casket into eternity. The wounds on your face the snow has covered. That shadow of darkness shall not touch you. But in your eyes, though dead, rages agony. And from your trampled heart it cries, I want to come, eternity, before your dishonored threshold with hurt and murder scars upon my face, just so my people walks about on 5/6 of the globe, marked by axe and hate, that you should it behold. You are this to read, carve it on yourself, and with your unapproachable indifference memorize. For every wound on my bruised and beaten face, a mother with a child escaped the hangman. Oh, the hand of the murder did not silence you. Snow has not covered the smallest sign. The pain from out your blackened eyes implores, striving forth from under brows like hills to heaven. A stream gone by and people lines entwine one in another. With resurrection, you, 6 million honor, murdered, tortured victims. As you honored them by falling down before them at midnight, alone, in unimaginable agonies, on ruins of Minsk, on snows of Minsk, in darkening storm, in whirling blizzard. Though dead, you would straightaway have interceded for their pain, their peace, their honor, a bleeding challenge to the world forged with frost on broken rocks and mourning streams. Dumb, it pleads, clear through the heart of all your people with your misfortune. In their graves, by arising, honor you the millions 6, as you by falling did honor them amidst ruined Minsk. Sleep in peace. Sleep. No care concerns you. It looks as though you flash a thought, though dead. Still shines from you the proud and moral brow. Still sings through you the plea of Levi Yitzchak's thou. Is love extinguished by a darkening storm? Can a snowfall really blanket fire? Like two Sabbath candles kindled, shine your hands from out your bier. You used to like to close your eyes in thought when you pondered something to see it clearer. Now you keep beneath their lock your pain. May it not gush forth here before your buyer. There's so much light around you, yet of mirrors none. Just so readied your first night makeup, as if your mouth's about to stir, and with the right foot, off to the stars you've gone. Your face turns back to stuff unlined, and death does its ruinous work betimes. Absorb your tissue this last time, music. It is your beloved from 3rd Benjamin abroad. Along with sounds, sucked full of tears and light. Go to eternity with pains uncolored. Be not ashamed of your wounded ancient face, of your smashed and broken kingly pate. This is your word in blood, your noblest paint, in which a corpse you outlive the stage, go into eternity. Your appearance is renowned. The stars of dawn will greet you with applause. Somewhere in heaven, midst wandering, gleaming shine, a star lights up in your brilliant name. Be not ashamed of your defilement and your pain. Let eternity be ashamed. The curtain does not descend. Not ere death do your eyes now close. A whole generation proud will carry your gift as you, your people's heritage. You do not depart from us. You enter all the deeper into us, laden, ripe, as under the sun's rays warm, a seed deep penetrates into the weakened earth. We'll no longer knock at the door and see your profile in your room, but without a knock, we'll enter into your heart, open, bare to all. That to all belonged, as does the sun, the hills and vales and beyond, with the dreams of our land on high, as on a golden gondola.
I want to thank everyone too for reading tonight, and part of the reason why I wanted to do this event was to celebrate the poetry of these Yiddish poets who are maybe often neglected or not remembered very much as they should be. So I think one of the main things I wanted to do is to celebrate their poetry. But as I look deeper, the history of their murder also is something I think important to discuss, because first of all, it's a tragedy and an unfair trial, and maybe some kind of sort of anti-Semitism that we might even be able to see today in some way or form. And I thought that it would be interesting to have a discussion.
And I just want to say I'm really honored to be here to pay my respects to these brave writers, and I'm so glad you guys are all here too. And thank you to Lucy and Serena and Globus for organizing this. Well, we were talking before about how it's commonly said that Yiddish is a dead language, or at the very least it's dying. And the interesting thing about it is that the number of native speakers of Yiddish, like people who are speaking Yiddish from the time they're speaking, you know, when they're a year or two old, the number of native speakers is actually growing. But it's mostly Haredi and Hasidic Jews who are very religious and not always interested in this secular Yiddish poetry and literature that we're all interested in. So there's a kind of divide in the community. There's a resurgence of interest, I think, in Yiddish literature, and there's more and more people who are speaking Yiddish as a native language. It's just that these two groups are kind of, I don't know, not always overlapping so much. But
was it not always so?
Right, of course. I mean, I would just say, you know, I being asked to do this event, I didn't set out to translate Hofstein's poem, but the more I looked at the other translations, the more I wanted to do something a little more accurate. And I just have to say it was a really profound experience translating it and preparing for this, because I felt like the more I really dove into his poem and read it and reread it, the more I felt like I was starting to know him a little bit, and then that made me think more about, you know, appreciating what he went through and how this is, you know, an event like this of translating one of his poems, even though it's a very famous poem, it's been translated before, and the other translations are certainly not bad. They're lovely. They just weren't as accurate as I had hoped for, but I don't know. I just felt good. I felt it meant a lot to me to be able to connect with him and his poems, and I'm glad that I have Yiddish so that I can do that. I feel like when people, you know, even if you just learn a few words, I think, I'm not saying everybody should do this, but I think that a lot of Jews, I think there's something of the soul of our people and our history, and knowing Yiddish can kind of bring you closer to that.
You perhaps know, or you might not know because it's a distant relationship, but did Solomon Lazowski speak Yiddish?
I don't know for sure, but I assume he did, you know, because he was born in a small village near Yekaterinoslav, and his father was a teacher of Heder, you know, Jewish school for children. So I'm pretty sure he did.
Yeah, I was wondering as I was preparing, also reading how many of the Jewish Anti-fascist Committee members, not the poets who wrote in Yiddish, obviously knew Yiddish, but there were a lot of people like scientists and not necessarily humanitarians. And a lot of Jews by that time were completely assimilated. I know that in my family, there were remnants of Yiddish in just some shards, words here and there, but most people didn't speak it, didn't read it.
My grandmother on my mother's side heard Yiddish in her childhood from her mother, from my great-grandmother, and that they corresponded when my grandmother was away from her mother. They corresponded, the letters were in Yiddish, but they didn't pass it on. And on my father's side, they were very secular, and their language was German, actually, not Russian. They lived in Latvia, bourgeois Latvia, where wealthy, they were very wealthy, you know, so the upper class Jews in Latvia were they had German culture rather than Russian culture before Latvia became Soviet, right? And so my father, I'll say, I was a very late child, right? So my father was already a mature young adult by the time the war started. So before the war in Latvia, in bourgeois Latvia, my father wrote reviews, theater reviews of Yiddish, of Jewish theater in Latvia. Actually, I posted some of them. I found some of them in several sites that have, you know, different archival material from old newspapers. pre-World War II newspapers. So I posted some of them on my Facebook page. So he wrote those reviews in Latvian for a Latvian newspaper. It was like right before the war. But the plays that he wrote about was in Yiddish. My father didn't know Yiddish because his parents didn't speak it, but they spoke German at home. So German was his native language. So by knowing German, he could understand those plays, and he wrote about them in Latvian. He grew up with 3 languages. German was the first one, Russian was the second one, and Latvian was the language that he spoke, in the streets, in the university. So in the case of those who grew up in Latvia in World War II, sorry, not in World War II, before World War II, before World War, not in World War II, they didn't grow up. Before World War II, they knew German, and by knowing German, they could understand Yiddish if there was an occasion for Yiddish. Like there was that Jewish theater, which actually functioned even in 1940 after the Soviet takeover of Latvia. The Soviets kept the Jewish theater for a while. And the plays were in Yiddish. And my father wrote about them for a Latvian newspaper in Latvian, which is a lot of languages together, but mostly they were very, I think, that generation was assimilated, but everyone assimilated in different ways. Jews in the Soviet Union assimilated mostly by speaking Russian, right? But in Latvia, they were assimilated in a German way. And that's why many of them didn't leave Latvia when they had a chance, when they knew that Nazis were coming. They thought, well, they spoke German. They didn't think there would be danger for them. So most of them didn't leave. My father did. My father fled Latvia a few days before the Nazis came. That's why I exist, right? Most of them stayed thinking Germans won't do it, just like they thought during World War I. They have German culture. They didn't think Germans were capable of anything that, they couldn't imagine what would happen. Therefore, they were all killed, as we know. Only my father left, my grandmother was killed, and 20 members of my extended family were killed in Latvia, and more than 20 members of my extended family were killed in the Ukraine. So my father escaped, yes, but everyone else was killed.
Members of the Jewish Anti-fascist Committee, Mikhail spoke Yiddish. Benjamin Zuskin, who was also a member, who was also killed in 1952, also spoke Yiddish. I want to say that the minutes of their meetings, of the Jewish Anti-fascist Committee meetings, were in Yiddish. I know they were in Russian, but I do believe Yiddish was a lingua franca, because when we say Jews were assimilated and didn't speak the language, most of them are pre-revolutionary. People who were born pre-revolution had way more access to the language because they didn't start the eradication of Yiddish campaign after the murder of Holocaust. So because when 1917 happened, they needed to reach the Jews. The Bolsheviks needed to reach the Jews, and they actually decided to do it in their language. So there were a lot of things written in Yiddish, and Yiddish was used as a language of communication, and I don't like the word brainwashing, but that was also it. And also today we think of Yiddish as we associate it with religion somehow, and it wasn't the case then. Just because people were religious, secular Jews in the former Soviet Union spoke Yiddish. It's for us today, we associate it with observance, we're associated with the ultra-Orthodox, but there is a very small and very vibrant Yiddish secular community here in New York, in North America, and all over the world, where people just learn the language for fun, who like Yiddish literature, who like Yiddish poems, who want to speak the language of their grandparents. And the events that I just participated in, the commemoration of August 12th, done by the Yiddish Cultural Congress, the Yiddish Congress, has been going on since the 60s. We haven't missed a year, and it's in Yiddish. And we do, at this point, we have translations, of course, and but it's in the Yiddish-speaking community, in the Yiddish literary community, August 12th is very much remembered.
My mother spoke Yiddish as a child. Her mother always spoke Yiddish in the house. Her English was very limited. And so as I grew up around the older folks who had immigrated from the Ukraine, I heard some Yiddish, but I really learned Yiddish in the college. I began at the university in Paris. And then I was actually with Yelena. We were in the same class in YIVO many years ago. And also at UC Berkeley. And yeah, so we have a long time. I've been a 20-year member of a reading group. We get together and we read the mostly novels and short stories in the original, page by page, out loud. Now we're on Zoom doing that. So yeah.
Sharon was reading her poem in English. All of a sudden I realized we were in the same class together at the Yiddish summer program in New York many years ago.
You just met here in the Zoom?
I was watching the event, and I was, I didn't know any of the people involved, and then I saw Sharon reading her poem and realized that, yeah.
I think these are two completely different things, that they're trying to revive Yiddish and preserve Yiddish here in the West, trying not to let it become a dying language that it seemed to be, right? That's one thing. And what was happening in Russia, the Soviet Union, in the first half of the 20th century, it really was assimilation. Jews did, I think even before the revolution, they tried to assimilate. So yes, they might have spoken, they might have heard Yiddish. We can't generalize because all families were different. My father's family didn't live in a shtetl, they lived in Moscow because they were very wealthy, so they were allowed to live. My father's father was merchant of the first guild, right? So they were allowed to live in Moscow, which was rather rare. So they spoke many languages, English, German was the native language, German and Russian were the main languages, but they also knew English because my grandfather studied in London. So I think my grandfather must have heard Yiddish in his childhood, but it wasn't a living language for them. And I think for many people, because they tried to be part of the society around them. And if they could, if they weren't in a shtetl, if they were in a shtetl, then they were already separated from the society, from the mainstream society. So I think to say that there was no assimilation at all, I don't think so. I think there was assimilation even before the Soviet time. There was a desire to assimilate.
That is not what I was saying. What I was saying is that what we consider assimilation in our 20th century way, I'm saying Yiddish was part of getting the Jews, unaffiliated, unpolitical Jews, into the political communist fold. So Yiddish was a major part, it was a tool. Yiddish used, okay. They used it for their own horrible purposes. Religious Jews had a regular Seder, Yiddish had a red Seder, all in Yiddish, but, we take someone else's tradition and we switch it because, there's no God, it's all, we did it ourselves. So I'm just saying that Yiddish was a part, but you're right, in the big cities, in Moscow, in Leningrad, that Yiddish went out the window very fast.
And as for the people we are discussing now, the poets and Lazowski, who was not a poet, but those who were murdered on that night, they were, of course, they knew Yiddish because, you know, either they knew it in, like Lazowski didn't, wasn't known to speak it in his adulthood, but I'm sure he knew it in his childhood, and the others actually wrote in Yiddish. So of course, they were connected to Yiddish. But I think in general, the general society, people try to speak Russian, or in the case of my grandparents, German.
Yeah, this event is so interesting to me because, you know, my maternal Jewish ancestors were revolutionaries fighting for emancipation in Germany in the 19th century, and wrote, you know, manifestos of emancipation in Yiddish, and you know, the war was lost and they had to flee persecution. But I think it's interesting, and this event is so important because you know, persecution is such an integral part of the Jewish story as a whole. But I think often what is overlooked is that the Jewish people and Yiddish as a language has this rich history tied to activism and a fight for equality and revolution that is often overlooked and is just really beautiful and rich and relevant today. And so I think, you know, it's just it's really cool to delve into that, and it's very beautiful to learn more about.
First of all, thank you so much for inviting me. I am extremely honored. I am one of those, you know, secular Jews who had no problem, you know, in the poem that I read, I had to look up all the biblical references because I had no idea who they were talking about, but I knew who Levitan and Kaganovich were, and, you know, I'm a good Soviet Jew. But having my family not come from Moscow or St. Petersburg or Leningrad, I have to say that, you know, my entire family is from Moldova or Ukraine. Everybody in even my parents' generation spoke Yiddish. And I think it's a matter of, like Nina said, you know, if you were, you know, Kupci Первой Gildii, a merchant of a first guild, and you were assimilated into the capital's culture, you were assimilated. You kind of had to be, you went to the gymnasiums with all the Russians. And as far as I know from my ex-husband's family, the only thing the Jewish children in the 19th and early 20th century didn't have to do in the gymnasiums was pray with the Christians. But their education was extremely indoctrinated in the Christian Russian culture. In the provinces, away from the two capitals, Jews were Jews. I grew up in Kishinev, which was the largest Jewish community down there. It was the entire city was 70% Jewish. It was a large city. And we were definitely urban, but we were, you know, I grew up, everybody was speaking Yiddish, mind you, so that the children didn't understand. Our generation did not speak it. I know a few cuss words in Yiddish, and that's the end of my Yiddish. This event was an eye-opener for me. I wish I could translate these poems, but for me, it would be taking a translation from Yiddish probably into Russian, if such exist, and then doing the translation. It is, weirdly enough, because I heard my grandparents speak it, it sounds like a lullaby to me when I hear Yiddish spoken. I have no idea what it means, but my grandmother, who is still alive and is about to turn 99, and who is the linguist of our family, she speaks Yiddish, which was her first language, Romanian fluently, Russian fluently, and English fluently. And by the way, apparently I'm related to Shalom Aleichem. Her father, so my great-grandfather, and Shalom Aleichem were third cousins. But I think pretty much every Ashkenazi Jew can say that they're related to Shalom Aleichem. So apparently
I know about that.
Yeah. she still sometimes will, you know, if I ask her anything, she can recite stories from Shalom Aleichem by heart from childhood, because that's what her father told her. So it's a huge part of her culture. So yeah, I would love for you to do further events on this. I think it's really fascinating. Yeah, please continue. This is really a wonderful event.
You mentioned Shalom Aleichem, and remember I mentioned that my father wrote theater reviews of the Jewish theater in Riga for Latvian newspaper, and many of the plays were by Shalom Aleichem. And actually I have, you know, I have some, I found some articles from before World War II written by my father, but they are in Latvian. I can't really understand, but I know there were some were by Shalom Aleichem and some were by other famous Jewish playwrights in Russia. I forgot the name of the one who was most famous. I posted an article, I mean, my father's article.
I guess I was also interested in the connection of the Jewish Anti-fascist Committee's activism, but activism through literature, in the sense what they wrote for the Black Book, documenting the pogroms in Russia. And I guess I was a little bit curious if their execution was somehow tied to a censorship of that in a way. But it's maybe, it could be linked, but I guess
it was kind of the end. The execution was a culmination
yeah.
that started with the real tightening of the screws for the Jews. That started with the murder of Reyes in 1948 and 1952 was just the pinnacle.
It just seems a shame because writers, they don't seem to be dangerous people. So it's a shame, first of all, that they were killed, but also that they could be forgotten. And that's what I wanted to do with this event, was to make their poetry live on.
So Matthew Solomon on YouTube says that coincidences, the first poem I read in public was by Markish, Brocksticker. I hope I pronounce it right, as part of a 12th August remembrance. After the reading, a woman my age told me her grandmother was Markish's secretary. Another listener, Ralph Electoral, says Yiddish was dead in my generation, which is baby boomer USA, but a childhood friend whose parents survived the Holocaust in Poland became the editor-in-chief of a recent English Yiddish dictionary. And another listener suggesting that she should record poems that she remembers so they are preserved, which would be another interesting project to do. Well, for now, I just want to thank everyone who read today, everyone who recorded. Thank you, first and foremost, Lucy, for coming up with this idea, for doing all this work, for bringing the group together, and just being the heart and the brain behind this powerful event. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. And I would love to continue the conversation more, because I think there's a lot really to be said, not just about Yiddish or Yiddish literature, but about the history. And I have so much more to learn as well. And my curiosity is growing as we continue this discussion. So thank you.
Zarina and Lucienne, thank you for organizing it.
Excerpts from an elegy for the Soviet Yiddish writers who were killed by Chaim Brade, who was a novelist and actually considered to be one of the finest stylists in Yiddish of his time. He was less famous, but certainly as admired as both Sholem Aleichem and Isaac Singer, which is translated from Yiddish to English by Cynthia Ozick. I weep for you with all the letters of the alphabet that made your hopeful songs. I saw how reason spent itself in vain for hope, how you strove against regret. And all the while, your hearts were rent to bits like ragged prayer books. Wanderer, I slept in your beds, knew you as liberal hosts, yet every night heard sighs of ancient ghosts, pews converted by force. My memory kept it all, your hospitality, and all that Russian land that fed me, broad as its plains and confining as a cell, with its songs on the Volga and the anchors sunk in sand, homelands all gone, down in blood. And so, I tell your merits, I've always looked to your defense, not to justify the pity of your deaths, but for what you were when all the space of Russia sustained you still, and you lived your deathly lie. Maranos, your deepest self denies your face. I saw you, stunned and dumb, Yiddish poets of Minsk, Moscow, Kiev, when they brought home Job's heavy hurt, the few whom fate had spared. Agonized, you saw the credo you had catechized in holy Hebrew, Ami Mami, Shloma, all dead in the ravine at Kiev, among the hidden slain. With full faith, I believe in friendship of peoples. Faith, even faith, could not retrieve from Babi Yar. Are you asleep? David Bergelson came to me in the night. No sleep for me, Chaim. My bed is all nails from fright of what we hoped for, the new enlightened man, and I have lived to know him in my own lifespan. I can see his noose hanging down like lead, and his canny eyes, quick to find, from the way he bites on the knot of his thoughts with teeth set askew in his head. I can tell no one knows better the maze of his mind. Michoils, tragedian of Tevye and King Lear, the milkman's faith, the king's despair, your very fingers speak the lines, while double-dealing fate plays on. They call you Solomon, and Moscow crowns you king. I myself would rather shun Michoils. I fear nothing in him throbs for Solomon's song, or Israel's songs. But one New Year's night, when a blizzard beat and partied and vodka'd, all Moscow went mad, and both of us drunk, we pitched through the sleet. He groaned out the grief that stuck in his blood. I play the king with my hands, Suskin the fool with his feet. The audience knows no Yiddish. We bleat to an ignorant hall. The nation trembled at his death, when tyranny snuffed the guileless breath. Smelling of summer, a stag with belly sated, charming as a child, Kvitko smiled and faded, but Bergelson bellowed, "A third eye's what you'll need for all the tears you've yet to loose if you run away, Chaim. You'll only run to weep." Feffer gave his creed with outstretched arm. The days of the trials are done. Posters on the walls could thrill us then. But he forgot the walls of the cellars where the prisoners were shot. The day of his trial. Let me be mute. Praise God, I wasn't there. I feel my own head crack with the bullet aimed at Colonel Itzik Feffer's back in cold murder. Hard for me to speak of him, and then hard not to. Still, let me deliver his name from evil repute. I am the man. When we met to remember the slain, I saw his tear and heard his haloed amen. Peretz Markish flies into the room with a storm, flies out again with a lightning's flare. His grave grown scant for his giant's form, his arms spread wide with wing-like whir. Stormy poet, enchanting silhouette, how the style of your step bewitched. But when you ranted, a great bird twitched, and your poems were rant, caught up in a net, thickets of words. You boomed like a wind, all gusto and gladness. Why does everyone fret? The storm in your song was thin for the doomed Siberian dead. I'm free, I'm free, I'm free, you said, wild as your poems. You shook out your wild hair. Already, the rifle was cocked to tear Apollo's wreath at a lovely head. Ghosts justify my despair. Phantom faces smile their lost, mute shame. Through nights of fever and dream, you raised your palaces to glimmering ruin. In your poems, you were like a pond, crooked mirror for the world of truth. The young have forgotten you and me and the hour of our grief. Your widows receive their dower of blood money, but your darkly murdered tongue, silenced by the hangman's noose, is no longer heard. Though the muse again sings in the land, you left me your language, lifted with joy. But oh, I am bereft. I wear your Yiddish like a drowned man's shirt, wearing out the hurt.